Fire Engineering Radio and to our show Pride and Ownership, the love for the job. I'm your host, Chief Rick Lasky, and last time we were together, we talked about how some things got started and along this whole Pride and Ownership thing, and it's amazing, just within a week or so since we did that first show and posted it on the website, how much feedback we've gotten, and folks send us some emails and calling about some of the different programs they're doing and some of the impacts they're making on the fire service. It's exciting. I think it's an exciting time for the fire service. We've got some exciting things going on here in Louisville. I have to mention today my bomb and arson chief, Division Chief Terry McGrath, is graduating from his ATF Explosives Canine Detection School in Virginia. Terry had been through that program once before and was assigned a dog. Daisy was a wonderful dog. Unfortunately, she caught that megavirus and we lost her in 2 days, and we missed her so much. And Terry, being the guy that he is, and his family decided they're going to step up and take that assignment again. And I know ATF regards him as one of their best handlers. But he's graduating today, and our two assistant chiefs, Daryl Brown and Tim Tittle, are going to be there for his graduation. He'll be on his way home with Aretha. It was going to be Ricky Bobby Baby Jesus. I think that one went to India. Isadora or Aretha. So we got our ringtone set on respect with Aretha Franklin. So when he comes back, we'll know when he's calling. Spent last weekend in Sweet Home, Oregon. A great group of people out there, Chief Mike Beaver. And again, here's another department, like they are all over the country, doing some pretty incredible things when it comes to reinstilling that pride and ownership and getting some of the traditions and ceremonies and things back into the fire service. Sometimes you go to these places and you're visiting with folks, and what's really exciting is to find out that they're already doing some really neat things right where they're at. Received an article from a firefighter in South Bend, Indiana, about we do so many of these programs and do so many of these different outreach things, and some of them are helping people recover from fires, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But some of it's just getting out there and making a difference and helping people get through their day, especially with stressful as things can be. But got a great email from Pete, an engineer on Engine Company 8 in South Bend, Indiana, and he just wanted to tell us that they were out working in a neighborhood where they have an annual Christmas event, holiday event, and helping Santa do some things like we've all talked about, and getting out there in the community. And they actually caught a run on that block of a man choking. The newspapers did a great job writing up called "Santa's Little Helper Turns Lifesaver," and got there and found a male victim down, blue, choking, and were able to remove the object and get him breathing again, and turned what could have been a horrible event into something very positive, and the folks are obviously very appreciative. And here, just a side effect, if you will, or sidebar of going out and helping someone and doing another program, and they happen to be right there when things happen. So, he sent us that. I know Joel Hewitt in Minnesota, they did an engine wedding down in an in-service a while back, and turned it into a big-time community event, and it was covered well. And so, let us hear about your programs and how you're making a difference. We'll give you some emails at the end again, but let us know what you're doing so we can brag on you and tell the rest of the fire service world what you're doing. A couple other quick notes. Fire engineering is looking, from what I understand, Chief Halton told me that Peter and the group are getting ready. Hopefully in the future they're going to change the website up a little bit, and it already looks great, but add a couple things. I know a lot of people have been asking where they can find this show or the podcast or the radio show. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of firefighters that don't know what a podcast is, but and that's the question I've been getting the last couple of weeks. But if you go right to the middle, obviously the webpage for fire engineering is www.fireengineering.com. If you go right to the middle of the front page there, you'll see podcasts and videos. There's a bunch of great stuff that Chief Halton did while he was over in FDIC out in the east there, portion of the world. And there's some other things. You've got the blog on there. Like I said, there's some pretty cool things that fire engineering is doing with that website. And once you get on it, you'll have a hard time getting off. So last show, we kicked off the whole Pride and Ownership program here with Peter and the folks called How Pride and Ownership All Got Started, how the program came about. And with today's show, we're going to take the whole how it all got started to another level. We've got an incredible guest. I brag on him everywhere I go, every class I teach, and I mean that truthfully. Every class I teach, I mention the name Glenn Corbett. And Glenn's a professor with John Jay College in Manhattan. He's an assistant chief with the Waldwick, New Jersey Fire Department. Been in the fire service pretty much 30 years. If you've had anything to do with the fire service, you definitely know who he is, besides him being a technical editor for fire engineering. He's probably, and I know he gets embarrassed when I say this, he's going to argue with me, but he's probably by far the smartest firefighter I've ever met in the face of the earth when it comes to whether it's codes, history, what we do. I mean, you ask him anything, it's almost scary how much he knows and how quick he can get it back to you. You'll see on the website he does Corbett's Trivia, constantly pushing the history, and we're going to talk about that. He's got a column in the magazine. He does a lot of articles. He's got one called The Professor. I know he's on the blog. He's got the book he did, was asked to, and I know it was an honor for him to work with Frank Brannigan before his passing and to make sure that book got published on building construction afterwards. And is just an absolutely incredible person. And I'd like to welcome Chief Glenn Corbett this morning. How are you, Glenny?
Hey, Chief Rick, how you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy. One of the things, a lot of people come up, Glenn, all the time and ask, when we did tradition for the first time at FDIC in Indy, often, people will sit there and see Glenn and I when we get together, and when we start going on the fire service, history and traditions and ceremonies, and when you can get Glenn going, it's awesome. People just pull up a chair and get notepads out, and we did that first program, and typical Glenn walked in about 5 minutes before. We had about 1,000 people in the room, and he said, "Ricky, I changed the program up a little bit," and I went, "Okay." He goes, "Yeah, just can you do me about a 20-25 minute like simulated keynote, like you're talking to the candidates on their first day?" And he said, that kid in the front row there with his cell phone, pick on him and let's throw around this. And we had a lot of fun with that, Glenn, and people keep asking when we're going to do that again.
Yeah, that was fun doing that and everything. And I threw you the mic, and look what happened. Boy, it was that room was full of excitement. Let's put it that way, especially from something that the guys in the audience didn't even realize that they were going to be part of the presentation. Let's put it that way.
Do you remember when Murph walked in after we had the problem with the lights going off, and I kind of made my threat that we'd go out and beat someone up if the lights went off again? He came in and said, "Turn the lights down so they could see Glenn." And the one kid said, "Are you kidding me?" Come over and beat me up. But hey, Glenn, real quick, tell me how, and buddy, we've talked about this before, but for other folks out there, how did you get into the fire service? How did it all start for you?
Well, like a lot of guys in the fire service, it was a family tradition and everything. My father actually was involved in the fire service when I was growing up and stuff. He ended up being a chief in our department in Waldwick, and have been an auxiliary in Patterson for several years. And so I just kind of got interested in it, and decided that this was a great career, and ended up basically got involved in a bunch of different things. Worked in Texas for about 10 years in San Antonio and Austin, and back up here in Jersey, and teaching in the city. And like I said, it's as everybody would tell you, I'm sure, Rick, in the fire service, it's a calling. It's something that it's not a 9-to-5 job, certainly. And people who have gotten involved with this realize that pretty quickly, that it's that there's, and again, we're talking about tradition today. There's a history and a tradition in this fire service that really sets the tone for how we do things and why we do things and that kind of stuff.
Well, and again, knowing that you're a second generation firefighter, and there's some folks out there that are third and even further than that, is just, and I know your passion. I know you're my buddy and my brother, and we talk all the time. And I know you've got to get a lot of great feedback on the book that you did, on building construction with Frank, and making sure that got out. I know a lot of folks I talk to all say, have you gotten that book yet? And I'm going, absolutely, I got it as soon as it came out. That's got to make you feel good to. I mean, there's and I know I always embarrass you, buddy, but I have to. I mean, we were talking right before we started. When you were down here, last night I got up for a run in the middle of the night, and one of the first things I thought of, because I was excited knowing you're going to be on the show this morning, is, the time you were down here for the Fire Chiefs Convention in Dallas, and, knowing that you'd been down here in Texas and how much your wife liked the tortillas, and next thing you know, you were wrapping them up in tinfoil and plastic and FedExing them next day back, and with Diane Feldman was in the front seat with me, and you and Tom Freeman were in the back, and I said, I've got the two smartest firefighters in the world sitting in the back car, and I wish I had a tape recorder to tape what you guys were talking about, because it was incredible. But you've got get a lot of great feedback on that book, and just the feeling of being able to do that with Frank.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. I am certainly not that person, but yeah, it's I have, as many of us do, we have a love for the history, and we're much different than a lot of other organizations, and just a quick tidbit, family-wise and stuff. It was kind of interesting. Several years ago, because I collect, as Rick does, I collect firefighting antiques and things like that, and many years ago, I picked up a silk, how you even describe it, a silk set of portraits of all the company and senior officers in the New York City Fire Department in 1906. It was interesting about it was that I had my grandfather's uncle actually was at that time they were called foreman, which is today what we would call a captain, of Engine Company 1 in Manhattan. And we never knew what he looked like, and the weirdest thing is that when I received this big silk, again, set of portraits, basically, it's probably 3.5 feet long and probably about 3 feet high, this thing, and there's literally hundreds of portraits on there. There was one guy, we couldn't make out the name of who this we thought it was probably him, but the name was kind of rubbed out because it was old. It was 100 years old, basically, and kind of hard to make out. So flash forward 2 years later, I ended up at a meeting on Randall's Island at the Fire Academy, and had been told that there was another one of these floating around out there at the training academy. And sure enough, I'm sitting in a conference room looking out this glass window, and lo and behold, here's the other one, the matching pair of this one.
Wow.
And what the funny thing was is I went over to it, and it was actually in much better condition than one I have, but sure enough, I went right up to it. I knew what picture I was looking for, and there was my grandfather's uncle sitting on that sitting on that portrait there. And what was ironic about it was that he was killed about a year later at a fire on 14th Street. So it was quite the thing. My grandfather talked about him, and he I love the fire service, certainly love fire service history, and we really came full circle. So you never know when history's gonna present itself to you, right, Rick? I mean,
especially family wise, buddy. And it's
right.
I mean, a similar story. You've met Ray Hoff,
sure,
battalion chief from Chicago, was best man, at Jamie and I at our wedding. And when I was doing all my collections, I never told you this. I had another firefighter say, well, my grandfather's had this box, and you can have it. There's some training books from Chicago in there, and he gave it to me, and it had to do with training on the new snorkels when Quinn came out with them, and the truckman's belt, which is kind of synonymous with the Chicago Fire Department.
Sure.
Different things in there. There was a big black 3-ring binder. I opened up, it was someone's personal training book with their notes, handwritten notes, flyers, information, manuals. And I looked at the name on the label inside. It was Battalion Chief Thomas Hoff from the Chicago Fire Department.
Wow.
It was dated, I think if I remember right, a month before he was killed in the line of duty.
Wow.
Back on Valentine's Day, back in the 60s, with the whole, holding, the son holding the helmet and all those different things. And I couldn't wait to get it to Ray and say, here, I mean, this doesn't belong with me. It belongs with you. It had their home address, and just one of those things, like you say, that all of a sudden, how many years later you come across something, and
sure,
such a small thing can be something so special.
Sure.
And I have to tell one more quick story about Glenn. We're, one of our battalion chiefs, Jerry Wells here, does different things with his folks regarding building construction. Kind of gives them little quizzes. And one day, I walked in the kitchen at our central station. They're all sitting there doing a quiz on not building construction, on history in the fire service. And Jerry Wells, the battalion chief, who, by the way, this month's issue of Fire Engineering and the Roll Call series for December did a great article on the rookie firefighter, what you need to do to prepare for the job once you get there, what the expectations of. I mean, that's one of those ones, Glenn, that we need to copy. And when you have a young firefighter or a young man or woman come up to you and say, what's it take to be a firefighter and what's going to be expected of me, you can hand it to them. So, Jerry, you need to take a look at that. Jerry did a great job with that. But and he had this contest. Whoever came up with the right answer, he'd buy root beer floats for him. And so I called Glenn on the phone, on his cell phone. He's on the subway headed home from John Jay from the college. And I think we had you on the phone for like 45 minutes while you're riding the subway and on the speakerphone. And guys were asking all kinds of questions, and Glenn was rattling stuff off, and I could only imagine what the folks on the subway are going, who's he talking to, and why is he talking about fires from way back when? But,
it was in the winter, too. It was actually on the platform. It was pretty cold out there.
Well, and Glenn, tell me, I know we've talked about, how long fire engineering has been around, but give me a little history on before we get into the rest of this stuff, about fire engineering. I know, a couple of times I've been there, the archives with all the magazines and issues. Tell me a little bit about fire engineering.
Well, if you look back in the 19th century, there were different startups with essentially, you almost could call them actually more newspapers than they were even magazines per se, because there weren't really magazines back then around the Civil War, or even earlier than that. So they're essentially newspapers that were dedicated to a variety of different industries, things that people were interested in, and of course one of them was the fire service. And there was a few startups before the Civil War, but they really didn't go anywhere. And then post-Civil War, things really started to change, even just in the printing industry in general, and different types of paper, for example, things. Well, anyway, not too long after Civil War, of course, in 1877, fire engineering wasn't called that then; it was called the National Fireman's Journal. Okay. Started publishing, and this is the guys will get a kick out of this, weekly. We'll call them today, again, magazines or even newspapers, but they were weekly. Of course, they had no photographs. They didn't have any, features like we have today, of course. They did have illustrations that illustrated, particularly for ads and for, steam fire apparatus, that kind of thing. But they were unique though, because, this was the first time that, and especially again with the National Fireman's Journal, that there was a continuing, ongoing transfer of information within the fire service, and really what it really focused on was not so much in the earliest days of like training articles and things like that, but it was really just talking about what was going on in different fire departments. So if you were to look in the 1870s or 1880s in the, again, National Fireman's Journal, you would see that they talk about that the Dubuque, Iowa Fire Department bought a brand new steamer, or Los Angeles had just tried out new uniforms or whatever. It was a lot of stuff in there, and what was really funny about it, Rick, is that that they had things called random sparks, okay, which were like jokes and funny things about the fire service. So it was quite something. And Rick, I think for the listeners here today that something we're trying to do, because we realize how important this is, but what we're trying to do is to somehow get this material digitized, to get it out to the fire service, because literally the entire fire service history is in Fairlawn, New Jersey, on the shelf, because literally all the departments, and if you think about 1877, this is a time when there's a transition from the volunteer to the paid sector. New York City, of course, went paid in 1865, Philadelphia in 1871. This is the time period when there's a transition from in the bigger cities from volunteers to career firefighters. This is also the time, of course, when we're transitioning from hand operated apparatus that was used pretty much right up to 5 or so years before the Civil War into, of course, steam apparatus. Chemical wagons are coming into play at that point. So this is a great trend, and of course the fires themselves. I mean, you think about fire engineering has seen just about every fire after the Great Chicago Fire and Boston Fire of 1872. I mean, it's seen just about everything through those years. So this is fire engineering, like I said, has what we call it today. Has just an unbelievable set of our collective history, basically about just about every fire department in America. There's information about it. So anyway, it's an exciting thing. We're trying to work out the logistics of something like this. It's not going to happen soon, but we're working on it and things. So
and Glenn, it was the first time I saw that when Diane showed me that room. It was like something that you see with Nicolas Cage in National Treasure. I walked in that back room. I think we were still in Saddlebrook then, and I looked and I just saw. And I go, you're kidding me? That's everything right there. And I was almost afraid to touch. I was just like, oh my, it's the information and the stuff. I don't know if now Diane does Fire Yenta, which is kind of the Sparks thing you were talking about, and then we've got round tables. I know those were back then, and random thought. It's kind of funny. Do you see a lot of the? We've talked about it before, but a lot of the same stuff kind of cycling through that we're back to a lot of the same things that were going on way back when.
Yeah, it's you'll if you were to look in these journals, and I didn't, if I just printed out what was in there, you wouldn't necessarily recognize that what you're reading is maybe 80 or 100 years old. I think one of the best examples several years ago, some of you may have remembered a bad fire in I believe it was Hamlet, South Carolina. In a chicken processing facility. I think it killed somewhere around 20 some odd people. And when we wrote an editorial at the time about the fire, the then editor Bill Manning and I had actually went back and pulled out essentially the text from the report on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911, and we just took that and ran that as the beginning part of this editorial. And so, of course, as the readers are reading this, they're thinking we're talking about the Hamlet fire, the chicken processing plant, but in fact, they were reading about almost identical situation in the Triangle Shirtwaist fire in 1911. So it was, to show you how, to tell your listeners that, believe me, there's a lot of stuff in those old journals that we think of as new today, but they were thinking about a lot, not everything, but they were thinking about a lot of the same issues that we're talking about today. So,
and isn't it amazing? And not only that, Glenn, we've talked about this as well. Is unfortunately, when you look at the line of duty deaths that are occurring today, we've said this through all the different classes, whether John Salko does it through Get Out Alive, or we did it through SAMR, or you've done it with your programs. It's the same stuff killing us. You could almost take one of those articles probably from back then about a firefighter that lost his life and play it out today, and it's the same.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it's the same stuff going on.
Yep. And like you say, it's you look back there and you think, wow, we really, of course we're in this, in this day and age in 2007, the end of 2007. Looking at what's going on in the fire service and thinking, well, some of these things are fairly new, and there are some, of course, lightweight construction, things like that are relatively new to the fire service, but so many of these other things, it's the same thing over and over again, and that's why I think really where history, plays an important role. Some firefighters I talk to, especially when we talk about building construction and things, wonder why, for example, in Frank's book, that there's constant references to earlier fires, and I think probably a lot of guys realize that's our history, number one, and number two is that we're repeating some of the same things over and over again, and certainly we fight fires in buildings that are 100 years old. And if there were lessons learned in the 1930s about a particular issue, it's certainly even still appropriate for today. So it's history is really it's a fun thing. It's really kind of interesting to talk about, but in a sense, it's also really an integral part of how we handle things today and why we do certain things. Because again, it's something that's particularly relevant to our safety, especially.
Well, and I think, and that's why I was so excited to I knew you would, but you're such a busy guy to get you to be with us today, and we're probably, the way of looking at it, and I'm even more excited about this because it'll give us more time. We're going to probably do a part one with Glenn and then a part two, and when you just led in perfectly to what we want to talk about today, or start off talking about today, as our main topic, and that's I guess. The fire service, the traditions and the ceremonies, everything from the terminology and why we do what we do, and then, all that great stuff, and then lead right into some of the fires that have impacted. And you mentioned something, Glenn, and you taught me this, and then I realized this with my quest for antiques and that when I started reading rule books from like the Brooklyn fire companies and things back in the 1800s and journals, and realizing a lot of what we do today, both in the paid and volunteer side of things, a lot of how we do it is set and was set and dictated by how they did things with horses and things way back when. But I know everywhere I go, I mean, everybody wants to know, Glenn, about the stuff that you and I have so much fun talking about. And I thought this would be a great way to get it out to people that can't be with us every time we're at a conference together having supper and talking. But terminology-wise, let's get into that. Okay. When we did tradition, we listed a bunch of different things, and I just kind of pulled up a chair and I just sit there and take notes and listen because you amaze me. And I know I keep embarrassing you, but it's true, buddy. You're just amazing when it comes to everything in the fire service. But the one I had the most fun with, Glenn, is when we talk about how the term runs came about. Can you explain that? Because there's a lot of there's brand new firefighters, rookie firefighters today that'll say, man, we had a busy night. We had 5 runs after midnight, or we had 15 runs or 20 runs yesterday, or 5. Where did that term come from?
Well, prior to the Civil War, especially in our bigger cities, we basically used hand pumpers, basically, and they were also hand drawn at the same time. So, it was a fire. Basically, the fire company would come from their homes directly to the particular company that they belonged to. The doors would fly open and out would come the hand pumper. Now, that required, and this is ironically, there's another important issue here too of when we look at the history of why we do things the way we do things today, and ironically, staffing was even an issue back then. Okay, before the Civil War, because when you looked at the type of apparatus that you had, again, these hand pumpers, they required larger numbers of people to operate them, okay? Typically a minimum of perhaps 10 or 15 people, depending on the size of the engine. Upwards of some engines out there, one particular one in New York was called the Man Killer and required 60 guys to operate it at a time, okay?
And didn't they have to rotate him through, Glenn?
Yes, they did, because he got
tired. I mean,
right. Now, if you can visualize, I know it's hard to do it over the radio here, but if you can visualize 2 pistons basically going up and down, forcing water, out of essentially these pistons, so it was part of a pump, and then out through the hose line, basically. Each one of those pistons went up and down twice in a second, basically. So, and you'd have these large, what they're called brakes, actually, common, the same thing we use for vehicles today, brakes, but these are called brakes, these big, long, wooden, poles basically on either side of this engine, and these poles would go up and down, pushing these pistons up and down, basically. And so if you could imagine that every second these things are going up and down twice, you can figure out how quickly guys are going to wear out doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what would happen is they would run for a minute or two, and then there would be a second group of guys that would come in, take over where a guy dropped out, and then go back in. And a lot of guys are actually injured with this because it's moving so quickly. If you put your arm or your head or whatever in the wrong spot, you're going to get hit with this thing, and that's the end of you. So, but of course, like I said, that's, we talk about hand pumpers. Here's a situation where we needed large numbers of people to operate it. We also needed large numbers of people to pull it. And when we pull, of course, we pull the engine to the scene. Very often, since this was such a, even in, we think about, the excitement that a fire produces in today's terms and things. But back then in the 19th century, this is even unbelievably more dramatic situation. We've got this many firefighters in the street basically pulling these hand-drawn apparatus. And they would attract, basically other people, including a lot of times younger boys and men and things that weren't old enough to join the companies. And very often they would help pull the apparatus, so they would run alongside the apparatus, bearing a torch, for example, with the company's number emblazoned on it, basically a glass paneled torch. And these guys ended up basically, running with the apparatus and stuff. So when we talk about runs and runners, I mean, it really comes from the word runner, were the people that actually, were associated with basically pulling the apparatus to the scene. There's There's also a similar term that came in, and again, this is all before the Civil War, basically. As another term we use, we talk about bunker gear, bunker pants, bunk, and things like that. You can go back into the 1850s, the late 1850s, early 1860s in New York, and see references to bunkers in the firehouses. And of course, this is another. And by the way, we talked about the hand pumpers here and everything. We talk about staffing and things. When the steam, you can imagine for the guys who are listening to this, that when the steam fire engine came into play, the steam fire engine only needs perhaps 2 or 3 people tops to operate it, and of course some guys in the hose line. So when you had fire companies that were 50 or 60 or 75 strong, when they went to steamers, basically there was a lot of jobs that were eliminated, basically. And so we took.
Some of those things you and I've talked about. I mean, that's just some of those books where, I mean, exactly where you think guys are upset now about, staff.
Yeah, I mean, it is a different issue today because it's more obviously it's more of a safety issue today and critical one at that and everything. But it's when we talk about staffing, actually, like I said, staffing has been with us for a long time, and we've always been for the most part on the down end of staffing. It's never gone up, during this time period from before the Civil War to today. So, but just quickly, I'll finish up on that bunker thing. There was a desire, for example, especially in the young firefighters' parts, to actually stay in the firehouses, because if you think about even today, to a certain extent, the volunteer firehouses really weren't residential type setting. I mean, you went there for the fire, you had meetings or whatever, and then you went home. Well, there's a lot of younger guys that joined the New York City Volunteer Fire Department that perhaps didn't have a home or whatever, ended up bunking in the firehouse. So right before the Civil War, a lot of the firehouses, the second floors were outfitted with bunks. The whole 9 yards. There's some really interesting illustrations showing, for example, at America 6, that's Boss Tweed's fire company, that was featured in the Gangs of New York. And by the way, for the listeners, most of that was phony and fake. So,
well, there's something I'm going to get to you about.
But that's where bunkers came from. Is that we think about bunker gear today? You're literally talking about these young guys in the late 1850s and early 1860s living in the firehouse, and in fact having their pants at the side of the bed. And there was a kind of a joke back then that these guys were so quick that they actually could take their boots and throw them out the window and be able to get downstairs to the apparatus before the boots hit the ground outside. So anyway.
And Glenn, you've shown in that class, and you turned me on to, and I think we're running them out of print, but you turned me on to 2 books, and I might as well jump on this right now. There was a website you gave me, abebooks.com. I know there's a lot of great places for books, but
just abe.com, right? American Book Exchange. It's just abe.com.
And Glenn, I've given that to everybody, but every class I do on Pride and Ownership, the first thing they ask is where do you get a book? And there's so many books out there, whether it's about badges or the call boxes or FDNY or LA or whoever. And the 2 books that I just love, I'm sitting here in front of me, and the one I can't put it down when I start reading it. I've been through it probably 10 times. But the first one you gave me was Fire in America. By an author named Lyons, Lyons, Fire in America. And I know he did one later called Fire, which I haven't got into, but this one takes, from 1600s all the way up to the 70s. It's published in the 70s, and there's just unbelievable information in there, and photos like the ones that you and you've seen and used, and then the other one was The Romance of Firefighting by Holzman. It's just and it published in the early 50s, and you can't put them down. And it's got the pictures, and I think, Glenn, a lot of young firefighters, I think they grew up thinking that's all kind of just drama. When you see those rigs coming down the street, the hook and ladders with 15 guys hanging off them, or all these people doing all these fires, you see this fire, and you see, just like you said, 30, 40 guys stand around, throwing those arms and pumping and everything. That I think they think that maybe that's not. They're just adding that to make it look dramatic back then. But it's true, right? I mean, there were many people back then doing that.
Right. I mean, if you look at a lot of the Courier Knives images, I mean, those were drawn and prepared at the time when all this was going on. So they're essentially photographs of the 1850s, basically, and 1860s, in an urban environment in New York. Courier although I have never been able to track him down. He's been he's said to have been actually a member of the volunteer fire department in Manhattan, but I haven't tracked him down yet through the records and everything. But assuming he was, people there's several other artists that worked with him that actually were volunteer firefighters, so they understood the business back then, and certainly they were part of it. So they were, if you look at there's a few of them out there for your listeners. If you look at some of these prints, don't look at just the overall scene, but look at the level of detail in these courier prints. I mean, you'll see, for example, there's one called "Shake Her Up, Boys," which is a corner drugstore. It's on fire, and for the guys that have heard that there was never interior firefighting going on, and only since the 1950s we've been putting out fires on the inside of buildings and things like. I mean, hear all these crazy stories, but if you look at that late 1850s era image, again, "Shake Her Up, Boys" it's called, and again, there's all these hand pumpers operating. Take a look inside the buildings, okay? Because you'll see firefighters' images actually inside the building. So, and actually, one guy emerging out of this burning building, holding a baby in his arms with a ladder up to him and everything else. And again, these were, if you look at the detail, you'll see, for example, the leather hose that they were using back then. Of course, that's, we think about hose today and the problems we have with it, but firefighters would be particularly perturbed if they had to deal with the leather hose situation, where it had to literally be constantly, every day, basically, treated to make it pliable, basically, because it was.
Glenn, how was that? Was that with the copper riveted, or
yep.
how was that?
Yep.
Copper riveted leather hose.
Yep.
If you could imagine.
Matter of fact, in Philadelphia, Sellers and Pennock were essentially patented the mechanism to make leather hose with copper rivets. Up to that point, it's actually sewn together. So, but even with the copper rivets, it's still it was still a very leaky kind of situation. So if you look at that courier image, you'll see, for example, boards and rocks put on top of leaks and stuff. I mean, just look at the level of detail in those images. But yeah, like I said, that is a snapshot of that time period. And these were aggressive firefighters. I mean, there was no SCBA back then. I mean, these are, the turnout gear. Of course, I'm sure we'll talk about helmets today too as well. But you look at the traditional leather helmet that we still have today. That's the same format for that is you see back in that time period. I mean, the leather helmet really comes to the forefront in the late early 1800s by a guy by the name of Jacobus Turk, who was the overseer of the fire engines, basically the chief engineer. By the early 19th century, and there's several manufacturers, but one particular one, Henry T. Gradicap, starts his fire hat and leather business basically in New York, and he sort of sets the standard for helmets. Basically, these are helmets which have what we call today high eagles, or they're at that time made out of leather eagles that would have a helmet front on it that, in fact, was 8 inches high. I mean, today our standard fronts are about 3 or 4 inches. Back then, they were twice as high.
Well, and real quick, while we're talking about it, let's just
jump
to that, because
sure.
you and I didn't realize until I started collecting, when you start talking about the tops, everybody thinks of the eagle or the phoenix and all that.
Right.
But there were several back then, that meant different things. If you looked at some of these older helmets.
Sure.
When it came to tops, and what were some of those?
Well, I mean, you've got the frontispiece, which of course was a symbol of authority. You can go back to the 1820s and see, for example, today we use white helmet fronts for officers. Basically, that dates to the 1820s. That's how far back that goes. Wow. Okay, references to red helmet fronts, for example, also goes back. To that time period for hook and ladder companies, actually a little bit later, but toward the end of the volunteer era, you see the red helmet front start to emerge for ladder companies. But the helmet itself, since this helmet front is so large on the front, you need something to hold it steady at the top, and so Gradicap and others basically created these leather eagles, which were pretty much the standard for a while. There were actually some that made dogs and all sorts of other kind of different kind of holders. It's when you get to the same time period, right before the Civil War, you start to see a transition to metal helmet front piece holders, basically, and that's when you start getting a real variety. You've got not only the brass eagle, which of course the guys that wear helmets today that have those brass eagles, those eagles Again, the brass ones go back to the 1850s, basically, and that's sort of a throwback to that from that era. I mean, of course, the ones we have today, and nothing against the manufacturers, but they pale in comparison to the real beauty of these early ones, because they were three-dimensional and they were really something else. But I mean, you had lions, you had whippets, which is a type of dog, you had foxes, you had all sorts. There actually was one that was a rooster for a fire company. It was up in Rhode Island. So it's, there was this, the flavor, the flamboyance of the fire service, really, probably that was the heyday. If you want to look at a time period where this flamboyance, that really was at its peak, was really around the Civil War. It's the tail end of the volunteer fire services when you start the paid fire, the big city volunteer fire service. And when you see those kind of things, I mean, Philadelphia, for example, had a whole other different tradition. Their volunteer fire companies, along with Baltimore and St. Louis, actually, used stovepipe hats, which, unfortunately for Rick and I, these are things that Rick and I, our salaries can't afford too many things today. But I actually have part of one. But these are unbelievably well decorated, what we call stovepipe hats, basically. So if you think of Abraham Lincoln, and that's just a plain old black hat. If you see and again, there's images of these in the books that Rick has talked about here, but you look at these wonderfully hand-painted images, mythological images of particular people in our history, Lafayette, Washington, again, associated with particular fire company names. That's how they got their names, of course, they're very patriotic, and so they took names that related to American history or even earlier history, Greek mythological issues and things like that. And to some extent, some political things. I mean, there was one fire company in New York named after a famous actor who was involved, not directly, but his followers were involved in a gigantic riot in the 1850s. There was also another fellow in Philadelphia whose fire company was named after a particular fellow that was killed in what's called a nativist riot, which was an anti-immigrant, especially anti-Catholic movement in the 1840s in Philadelphia. It was a fire company named after him. So it's, there's again a lot of patriotic stuff. We see a lot of political things as well back then too. So, but again, this is an era where the fancy nature, the there's things that to some extent we continue to this day. We think about gold leaf even in paid departments, gold leaf on the apparatus. Well, that has its origins in the 19th century. I mean, as Rick and I Rick would point out, I think, you don't see too many people at a plumber's funeral, and you don't see, garbage trucks decorated with gold leaf and stuff, but all
great folks, but there's you're
right, good people, but it's just that we have a much, and this is why Rick, you pointed out earlier that things we do today have their origins in some cases, like I said, 1820s for the white helmet front. I mean, this is how far back this goes. So, and of course, the big one that unfortunately, Rick, what's the evil word we don't want to use when we talk about firefighting trumpets? Basically, we never call them bugles, right?
And I guess it's okay if you call it a bugle as long as you realize that they don't play music.
Right. These are they're right. They were speaking horns or trumpets that were used to amplify the foreman or the chief officer's voice, basically. And of course, the irony, Rick, is that New York City, of course, where a lot of these things were happening. Of course, all the at that time the foreman, assistant foreman, were basically lieutenants.
Well, Glenn, real quick,
yeah.
And I was going to ask you to cover that a little bit later on.
Sure.
Do that for me now. The terms, because when we talk about chief engineers, we have a chief engineer here,
right?
But he's not chief of department. He's chief, and he's incredible. He's a miracle worker.
Right.
He's in charge of our apparatus.
Right.
Real quick, kind of run through the titles and the responsibilities
sure.
of the guys before we get to the rest of the speaking trumpets,
right?
Of what they did and their titles.
Sure. Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Jacob as Turk was one of the earlier. He was titled overseer of the fire engines, but if you look at the terms that we use associated with the people in the fire department, for example, we mentioned Jacob as Turk earlier on as being not only the innovator of the leather fire helmet, but also basically being the overseer of the fire engine.
Okay.
By the late 18th century, you see the word chief engineer. And again, the chief engineer was really the guy in charge of the engines. Basically, he was the chief of all the engines.
Okay.
And so functionally, we think of chief today as sort of like of course, the commander, the incident commander, and things like that. But in reality, the job of chief engineer very often was associated with not just overseeing the fire companies, but actually seeing the apparatus. So, for example, when engine 5 had a problem or whatever, there was a chief's responsibility to make sure that engine got repaired and fixed, and if new engines had to be purchased, those kind of things. So there was a direct tie from the guy, functional person who was in charge basically of the apparatus, and that was his primary job. Running the fire scene was really kind of secondary to a certain extent, And so, I mean, there were people called fire wardens back then who also had power at the fire scene. These were fellows that went around. Basically, they had special long staffs, basically almost like a walking stick, but a little bit longer, that had usually a wooden one with a wooden gilt or gold flame on top, or in some cases they're actually brass flames basically on the top of these. And these were people that had power to, for example, back in the late 18th century, although we had fire engines in our bigger cities, they relied very heavily on pulling buildings down, for example, and things like that, because these engines were not particularly efficient, and a large fire, creating fire breaks, became much more of an issue. But getting back to the people and things, again, the chief engineer was in charge of all the engines, and then you had the individual companies themselves, the fire engines, the hook and ladders, which come toward the hook and ladders, which come toward the late again in the 18th century. And then the hose companies, which we don't talk a lot today, but those come 1803. The first hose company, American Philadelphia, is created. By the way, just one little tidbit on that. A lot of your fire departments that I know Washington for years, relatively recently, had two-piece companies where they'd have an engine as one and a hose wagon as the other.
Right.
I mean, that has its tradition in the early 19th century, because back then there was a small amount of hose put on the engine, but the bulk of the hose was brought by the hose company.
It's similar, and like we talked about before, with nowadays you see like Fort Worth, running ladders, and then they run ladder tenders too.
Right.
But the hose wagon, like when they had one in North Palos, Illinois, for the longest time, people thought, it's just a rig to carry an extra 5-inch on.
Right.
It does. It goes back to back when you're talking about.
Right, and we talk about triple. People even today here know about triple combination pumpers and things like that. When we got to motorized apparatus in the 20th century, that really was the point at which the hose and the pump were basically brought together, okay? Because up to that point, when you had steam fire engines, no hose on a steam fire engine. Again, separate hose wagon for that.
Right.
So again, this is the way things were done for so many years, because the apparatus couldn't hold the hose. I mean, there literally wasn't a place for it on the apparatus. And so, again, that's why some companies, because the way they perform, their operations ran around having separate pieces of apparatus, and I'm sure that's why it continues, especially like I said in Washington, is one I'm familiar with for years. But assistant foremen were the captains back then. Assistant foremen were the lieutenants, basically. That was the name of them. They were, depending even in the volunteer fire service today, the company officers were elected by the individual companies. The chief officers, depending on what time period you're looking at, again in the 19th century in the bigger cities, depending on also politically what was going on in the cities, the firefighters themselves would vote for the chief officers, except when the city council and things were having problems with the fire department, and then they removed that authority away from them, and they chose who the fire chief was. As a matter of fact, right after this gigantic fire in 1835 in New York, as a matter of fact, it was New York City's biggest fire in terms of number of buildings, 600 and some odd buildings burned in the Wall Street area.
Wow.
Right after that fire, that particular chief, a guy by the name of James Gulick, was removed from office, and a substitute fire chief that was appointed by the city council was put in his place. And even though the next guy coming in after him wasn't a particularly bad person, there were massive resignations because of that in the New York City Volunteer Fire Department. So politics also has been with us from the very beginning here too. So
the title fireman.
Yes.
And I've read where that, a lot of people would think, well, firemen, all right, before they become firefighters, but firemen with the steam engines, did that carry a different?
Yeah, well, and matter of fact, back then, I mean, if you look later in the 19th century, you see how, the positions, the names of the what we call firefighter, or today. For example, there were pipemen, okay,
right,
which was the guy with the nozzle, basically, okay. There were stokers, and of course, those guys are responsible for stoking the steam fire apparatus, basically putting the fuel in, the coal, or the original ones were wood, and then later went to coal, to fire up these basically boilers on wheels, these steam fire
right.
engines.
And then they have to keep. I mean, they had to keep those things in the firehouses. I mean, it wasn't that they just didn't start those things as they went out the door.
No, as a matter of fact, there was all sorts of. This is another tradition that we have in the fire service. The firefighters themselves invent things that makes their job easier, basically, or makes their job more efficient. And so, if you look at our fire service history, don't think that guys today that are firefighters have invented a new tool or something like that. This is something new. This is something that goes back from the very beginning. Also, Sellers and Pennock, I mentioned the riveted hose. Both of them were firemen in Philadelphia. So you look at the steam fire engine, you think, well, here's a situation where it's a boiler, and I got to get that boiler hot, and I need to get those copper tubes inside that boiler warmed up to create the steam. When the steam, of course, basically operates the pump, basically. And that's not something you just flip a switch on. Today,
right.
when a pump operator pulls up to the fire scene, he sets his brake, he sets the engine into pump, he goes over to the pump panel, and opens up his tank to pump, to fill his pump up with water, and he operates the throttle, and it's all there. It's switches and dials. Back then it was, hey, I have to literally get a head of steam up here. And so what they would do is actually have the fire burning in the firehouse, low heat and stuff. And then as soon as they went out the door, they would basically fire it up so that by the time they got there, even though it would be still several minutes, they would eventually get their head of steam that they needed to get and get the water flowing. So it wasn't a particularly fast operation. That's, by the way, also one of the reasons why in the late, let's say after the Civil War, again, right up through the 20s and into the 1920s, there's a proliferation of chemical fire engines, which some of the older guys will remember the old soda acid extinguishers.
Right.
You used to, in the schools, you turn them over, invert them. Right. There's basically acid inside the in the container, which mixes with another compound basically and creates pressure, carbon dioxide gas, and out comes the water under pressure. Well, essentially these chemical wagons were gigantic versions of that. Some of them were as low as 50 gallons. There were some that were several hundred gallons. But what's interesting, if you look at the history of this, you'll read about it. 80 to 90, once these chemical wagons came into play, 80-90% of your fires in most cities were actually extinguished by the chemical wagons because they were so much quicker to put into operation and stuff. Okay. The steamers really were for the large, at that point, end up becoming more the larger fire things. So you see a lot of cities putting heavy reliance on these chemical wagons. Now, of course, the problem with the chemical wagon is that all the water you have is in that tank. It's just sort of like having your engine with no water supply from a hydrant or anything. It's whatever you got in that tank is it. So and they hope that the fire's small enough at that point to be able to put it out. And that was the thing, is that they could run a chemical hose into the building and put it out. So chemicals were really big for about, probably 40, 50 years there.
All right, we're visiting with Chief Glenn Corbett, or as I call him, the Chief Professor, because he's especially with him working at John Jay and what he does in New Jersey and with fire engineering. And Glenn, I told folks last time, and I've told people when I go and do my lectures, that once you and I get together, I've been sitting here, I've got a stack of papers of notes I've taken. I do that every time I get a chance to listen to you. We haven't even made it through. We've made it through a third of the terminology when it comes to, there's things we want to talk about in the future, folks that a lot of guys will ask me about, everything from watchtowers and the red lights on firehouses to, the whole in full bloom and lumen up and all the different terminologies, and there's insignias and the badges and the Maltese cross, and it just goes on. We even do need to touch on trumpets. So this is going to be, for the folks out there, we're going to do 2 or 3 parts. We're going to get through with Glenn next time the terminology, and then we're going to get into some notable events in American Fire Service history, as Glenn calls it. We're going to get back to how this whole business of doing what we do for folks got started and take it right up to where we're at today. And then we're going to get into the fires that have shaped and formed why we do what we do in the fire service in North America now, why the men and women do what they do now. Glenn, I can't thank you enough, buddy. This has been, I knew it would be, but I mean, it's been incredible. And I can't.
No, it's been fun, Rick. It's you guys can see, Rick and I. We enjoy talking about this stuff, but we won't. Like I said, we won't torture you with this forever. But
you know what,
but
Glenn,
yeah.
Seriously, you see it. I'm telling you, I don't care where I'm at, whether it's Canada, the lower 40, if it's in Alaska, they want to know this stuff. I mean, there are so many firefighters that I think if they knew, you're talking about, having to keep the steam, the fire going and everything else to get ready for the steamers. You have some firefighters today that have a hard time just barely washing the rig, let alone making sure the water's in the tank, responsibility-wise. And that's the stuff they got to hear, Glenn. They've got to hear.
Do they want to know that the guys only got 3 days off a month and they lived there literally, and that why most firemen at those days they actually lived within about 4 blocks of the firehouse because they were let out for 3 hours, one for breakfast, one for lunch, one for dinner. They walked home. And that was it. But they're only off a few days a month. I mean, we think about, God, guys are working 50. There's still 56-hour firefighters out there.
And you look at the journals. The journals will say they sign up to go home to their families.
Right, exactly.
To go to their families. So that's the stuff. I mean, we're going to talk about, like I said, the shifts and how things got. Folks, just hey, I told you before. I told you last time. Seatbelt yourself, sit back. We're gonna have great fun, and this could be a great ride.
We'll try to throw some more jokes in along the way too. So.
But hey, Glenn, let's do this. Let's break it off here, and then we'll come back with the next part. Well, like I said, we'll hit terminology again, then we'll hit notable events and hit fires and
sure.
Glenn, if folks want to get a hold of you right now, I know you said you're in the middle of changing some email addresses.
Sure.
Right now, where can they get a hold of you if they want to ask you something?
Well, probably the best one, you can use my school email address, which is GCORBETT. So it's G Corbett, GCORBETT, at JJAY.CUNY, CUNY, City University of New York. So CUNY.edu. So it's G Corbett, GCORBETT, at JJAY.CUNY, CUNY.edu. And if you can't, if there's a mistake or whatever, take a look at the John Jay webpage. By the way, this is a free commercial for me right now, Rick. We're offering online classes. We're offering online classes next semester for you guys that aren't in the New York City area. We're having a variety of online classes that are fully credit-bearing, and we're actually having one class, so it might be exciting for some of the guys. One of our building construction classes is being taught by Deputy Chief Work from the Fire Department with several guest appearances by Chief Vinnie Dunn. So anyway, take a look at December issue of Fire Engineering. You'll see a bulletin in the back in the upcoming events section, and there's a URL to tie into. And if you're interested, you've got my email address now if you want to email about fire science program, or if you have any trivia questions, I'll try to answer the best I can. So.
Well, and I know, and I've told people before, Glenn, I said, be patient. I mean, Glenn's getting attacked from all different angles. Please, if you got a question, he wants you to get a hold of him, but sometimes it might not be, with everybody carrying huckleberries or whatever those things are, blackberries.
Right.
Sometimes they expect people to get back to them right away, and I find it difficult. I could imagine being in your shoes. But Glenn will get back to you, and to our editor-in-chief, Bobby Halton. Bobby and I talked about this, Glenn, and Bobby's like, oh man, I can't wait. I mean, he's so innovative with a lot of things he's doing. He's running at 150 miles per hour usually. But we were talking about the excitement about having you on the show, and the people are going to be doing their school projects and I'm not trying to embarrass you again on what you're going to be talking about here, buddy, because this is absolutely incredible, and I can't thank you enough, Glenn. And,
no, thank you. Thanks for having me, Rick. We've been good friends for a long time, and we both enjoyed talking about this, and like I said, we'll have some more fun with it next couple sessions.
Oh, it'll be great. And folks, that was what I call my chief professor, Professor Glenn Corbett, again, assistant chief at Waldwick, New Jersey, and technical editor with fire engineering, and among all different kinds of hats that he wears. And we were just so lucky and privileged and honored to have him on the show. And we're going to have him on next couple of times. We do some more different segments and really get you fired up about this whole pride and ownership thing, and we're getting all those questions you have about ceremonies and wedding gowns and the history and the traditions and everything, all the stuff that made us what we are today, and just gets us going again. We're going to get Glenny back on the show. And Glenn, I love you. Thanks, brother. And one quickie, if you got any questions, you can get me at rick@prideandownership.com. rick@prideandownership.com. Thanks for being with us today. And as always, be safe.